Welcome back. Glad you chose to come back. um, and yeah, let's get started with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the opportunity we have to spend time together and spend time together in your word and in your truth, especially as that has been given to us in your word, and as we have gathered it together and do our best to be faithful to it. We know that your word transforms us and shapes us, most importantly for eternity. But while we are still here on this earth, Lord, we are seeking to follow you and see what difference it makes to be your follower. So we ask you to guide our conversation this evening, Lord, as we explore your truth. In your Son's name, amen. Okay. Last week was a lot of heady stuff for me to deliver to you. And it was a lot of, I don't know, it was very theological in an academic sense, and it was very almost philosophical as we explored all kinds of things as to why faith would even make a difference in the first place. That's kind of what I was getting at, and why our faith would make a particular difference compared to whether it's other faiths, no faith, whatever, because we all have some kind of faith. That's part of the discussion that we had last week, is how every one of us is attempting to make sense of life. Every one of us is attempting to navigate life somehow, and we are looking to things to make sense of it. We are not born with it. We are not born with a sense of knowing what to do next. We are not born with a sense of, we're not actually born with a sense of safety. You realize that? Our birth is the first traumatic thing that we go through, right? So from our birth, we have been met face to face with how, whoa, what's going on, right? And that's the power then of, like, when the child gets to be united with the mom, is, as soon as that can happen, is that, oh yeah, that's right, that was safety. That's safety, right? We don't have it built into us, right? We don't provide safety for ourselves, right? We can do our best, right? We can load up in all kinds of ways. We can load up with all of the healthy foods and all the medication. We can load up on ammunition and guns. We can load up in all kinds of ways to keep ourselves safe. And we can attempt to do it as hard as we can. We still can't provide it in and of ourselves. Right? Same thing with, do I have value? It's not ingrained in us from day one. Do we have value from day one? Yeah. Our purpose, our place in life, it's not ingrained. We don't automatically know. Okay? And so we attempt to find answers to this from day one. All right, we can go into all kinds of, like, child psychology and child development in terms of the early years, and how did we find the answers to those questions? And guaranteed, our attempts to find the answers to those questions, or how they were provided to us, have played a significant role in the answers we've been drawn to later on in life, and how we filled in those gaps. Okay? Anyway, digressing back again. And so we spent this time exploring our need for identity and security and purpose or meaning. Okay? Asking the questions, who am I? What's my value? What's my place? Do I matter? And longing for acceptance. We look for something that will promise us that we are accepted. Right? My existence, fulfillment in life, whatever that is, I can have that, and I can know what that is. Am I safe? Do I have what I need? And wherever I find that, do I belong? Am I a part of, do I feel safe in that community? How do I feel safe? Right? This is where how becomes very important in our lives. How do we go about belonging and finding safety and security? And we long to be provided for because we can't provide everything for ourselves. All right? And so I didn't print this out again. I apologize. I should, Roman, on my desk, not the table, but the desk on the far edge of the corner, you should see some handouts from last week. I think that's where they still are. You grab some of those for those who were not here last week. Because this is not in your handout. I'm referencing it, but if you would like to have it in person. We're not going to spend a ton of time, but this is kind of looking back. Okay? So why am I here? What am I supposed to do? What is my role? We're longing for a sense of order. Like, is there a particular way that life is supposed to go? And if so, what do I play in that? What's my part? Right? So our some of our sense of injustice, right? And the things that we yell at the screen for, okay? Whether that's a sporting event or politics or whatever it is. The things that we yell at the screen for or are these things that, like, that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? Someone's not playing their part, and that threatens whether I have a part or how I play my part. Okay? We're all looking for these things. As Christians, the faith that has been given to us by God answers this. I find those things in God. What difference does that make? That's what the Apostles' Creed begins to provide for us. Okay? Again, the Apostles' Creed is much more than just a list of the things that we need to believe in order to be good with the church or in order to get to heaven. Because then we might be finding our identity and our security and our purpose in the Apostles' Creed. Or in the small catechism that it's contained in. Or in the Lutheran confessions, all the things that we say that I don't know if you remember when I was installed, and there was this big long list of things that I say I had to agree to. Okay? We don't make you agree to that when you become a member here, but I have to agree to that in order to be a part of the church body. Right? But I don't find my identity or my security or my purpose from those documents or from being a part of this church body or from being an officially, ordained. I'm sanctioned by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Okay? That doesn't mean I disagree. I agree with those documents. Good stuff. But God and his Son And the Spirit who enables me to believe in any of it is what gives me my identity and my security and my purpose. Right? And insofar as that truth is contained in these things that we hold to, then they provide value to us. They can help us along the way. And that's why I'm only talking about the Apostles' Creed. We're just starting there tonight. We could do it with all kinds of things. We're starting with the Apostles' Creed because of its historical value and because it summarizes the most basic, essential things. And you can find many answers in what the Apostles' Creed says, right? Because the Apostles' Creed is a summary of what God's Word says. Right? The truth about God and our relationship with Him and what that means for us. The truth of all that we find in God's Word is summarized in the Creed. Okay, so does it make a difference? Yes, and we can find a lot of those differences in the Apostles' Creed. Okay, we talked about these. This is the last thing from last week, and I'll talk to you now about how this is going to connect into what we're doing tonight and next week as well as it pours into next week. Okay. Yes, Jerry.
It seems to me like we have to add more than heaven and earth. It's now the universe, and we study it more and more. Well, way out there.
Yeah.
It's not just us here.
Yeah. And are you saying that as a positive or a negative?
Positive.
As a positive. Yeah. When they wrote the Apostles' Creed, heaven and earth was all that was on their mind. Okay? But by all means, their concept of heaven and the Word and all of that encapsulates everything in between, right? If you want to say that heaven is way up there or out there or some, right? It's everything. And we have clarified that over and over, and you can find that throughout in the history of the church. Whatever their concept is of beyond this earth, it has all been included in what we say here. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. Okay? This is not an exclusive thing like in all of the cosmos, in this Milky Way galaxy, this particular Earth was, God's special little project that He, this is His. Okay, this is not what we're saying. We are absolutely making a claim about Him being creator, that He is the creator of all things. Yeah. And what that means for us then is that we are a creature. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide quick, and I'm probably going to come back to explain this. Okay? So tonight's handout is a chart that looks like that on the screen. Again, this is more for reference. You don't worry about, you can't read this. It's on your handout, okay? Again, this is more for anyone who might watch this from home. Okay, this is what the chart looks like for those of us who have it here. And this chart basically, for the sake of our discussion, breaks this down into identity, security, purpose. How do we find answers to those things in each of the three articles of the Creed? And we are going to spend time together exploring those things, because this is where it becomes not just me giving you information, but all of us are equipped with the faith and the reason and the ability to connect the two and to say, what does this mean for me? Okay? So we're going to talk this out as we go. And as we go, questions can come up. Don't mind it at all. Because if this single exercise of filling out this chart takes tonight and next week, fine with me. Okay? There's no we got to get this done today. Okay? So I'm not going to be shoveling a bunch of answers at you to fill in this chart. This chart is for you to explore, for you to write down if you even want to. I don't care. You can just sit here and be along for the ride. That's fine. But if this helps you in the long term, great. This is what we're up to. Okay? So last week in this slide, you begin to have some of the answers. Okay? Because this slide in particular introduced the first article. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And so that whole top row, there are some answers there, right? There's your cheat sheet, okay? So you can begin to fill in the first row if you want with some of these answers. And we'll just leave this up here and talk about this for a moment. And again, feel free to pop in with questions about things as they come up, okay? What this says about God is that he is the Father and that he is almighty. Right? And in his fatherly almightiness and his almighty fatherliness, he made everything. And that connection is inseparable. He did not make everything so that he can play games with it and manipulate it and just get what he wants out of it. Even though, for some of us, when we think of fatherliness, maybe that's what we think of. That's too bad. That's too bad. But this, the idea that even strikes us as is proof. There is an idea of fatherliness or parenting that might be better than some of those things that we have impressions of, or maybe that we made mistakes with, or whatever that may be. We know there is something better that comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from us, and it doesn't come from just our collective understanding of things. There's a source of that. Okay? So we have a perfect parent and an almighty parent, and he loves. He is good, perfect, holy, absolutely. He is totally just. He absolutely cares about what is right and what is wrong, and there is definitely black and white with him. At the same time, he loves you. He loves you so much that he wanted to create you in the first place. In fact, when you dive into the theology and the philosophy and all those kinds of things, you'll find people from many different angles approaching the reality that our creation was because of his love, right? It was an act of his love. And you can this makes a little bit more sense, perhaps, when we read John 1 and how he creates us, right? That in the beginning was the Word, right? And the Word was there from the beginning, and all things were made through him. And then he comes down right? Even though his own didn't receive him, right? The things that the creation and the creatures that he loved so much and that he had this very long relationship with from a human perspective, right? They didn't accept him, and yet he did it anyway. Okay? We have a Father who does that. We have a parent, a holy, almighty parent who does that. So yes, he created everything. He has the power to do all of that, and he has the willingness, the capacity to love you and me and everybody. Okay? And that defines who we are and our value and our place. Yes, you matter. You have value because God made you. Period. There's nothing else more needs to be said. And I'll go back to at the very beginning. We talked about this last week a little bit. The very beginning, when he makes everything, it's all good. Good. Okay? Doubly good in the Hebrew. Then you know, man, it was perfect. That's what he said, and when all things were finished. And when he made man, he gave them a purpose. And he gave them, well, he didn't have to express the belonging because there wasn't any question about it. There wasn't a need to question it. Okay? But the identity part, the whole being made in his image, and the whole being the creature that has this special blessing and this special role to fill, that's kind of a part of our identity too. We have a special identity. Yes. But it's not conditional. Right? He doesn't give us that and say, now, you go be fruitful and multiply, and then you have security, and then you have a place here. That's not how love works. It says, hey, I brought you into this life. I brought you into existence, and here is your role to play. Go. I did it all perfect. It's all set up for you perfect, and you are perfect. Just go. So we have an identity. Yes, we are his creature. And yes, we are his child. We are all children. Now, when we talk about this being children, we all are built for this relationship. This is all the relationship we are meant to have. Unfortunately, not everybody recognizes it, and not everybody benefits from it. So when we say, we are all God's children here, there's a yes and a no there. It's, yeah, that doesn't intend, that's how, it's exactly what he means. By you having an existence, he wants to be that heavenly, almighty parent for you. But that doesn't mean that you benefit from it. That doesn't mean that you recognize that you are one, right? So, and we all may have done this. For ourselves, we have all may experienced it from our children at some point, or if that hasn't happened for ourselves in some way, we've seen it happen. You can choose to say, no thanks, I don't want to be a part of this family. I'd rather operate otherwise. That's basically what we did in the Garden of Eden. And that's what we continue to do in all kinds of different ways. Without diving into the deep end there, okay? So, yes, humanity is God's children. Yeah. Do they benefit from it? Not everybody. Do they recognize that they are? Do they call themselves that? Nope. Not everybody. So, there's a both and there, okay, when we might talk about that. Or have heard that, how we might have heard that phrase being used. Okay, so what it also means then as his creature. All right, this gets into the things that we have described already. We have limits. We were made a particular way, and we were made. Now, you didn't make yourself. And the two people that had a lot to do with you existing here, right? They didn't make themselves, right? And so on and so forth, right? Your existence has nothing to do with you, the origin of your existence, right? You are a creature. And as a creature, you have limits. At the very least, you are not the creator. And so, are we willing to recognize that? Yeah. Well, we like to live our lives as though we are in charge, right? We choose to live our lives like we determine our destiny, right? And we make all these decisions in our lives, and we do, okay? And we do that out of our own limitation. Because all that we know is our own existence. Some of us may be really great at empathy, but that doesn't actually put you in another person's shoes. Right? All you know is your own existence. And if we don't respond to that with some ounce of humility, maybe I shouldn't have phrased it that way, but it ought to come with that. Let's put it that way. That's what our faith says. And all through Scripture is the recognition, I'm not the be-all, end-all, but there is a be-all, end-all. Okay? All right. Yeah. Yeah. Go for it. I don't mind tangents. Yep.
In one place, I love the imagery of the first statement in the Apostles' Creed is, I believe in God.
That's kind of what I would. That's what I meant to be referring to earlier, with the idea of a parent. That like there are plenty of people that don't have a positive image of a father. So when they hear God the Father Almighty, that turns them off in a number of ways. The answer, though, I don't believe it's a wise and healthy answer to give, to say, well, then let's just remove the father, right? And I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, like, but that's the struggle is because we have negative examples of it. The existence of the negative example and the existence of the negative experience, and why would we associate that with it being negative at all? Why would the fact that we would even at some point in our lives, doesn't matter at what age, but at some point in our lives, we might recognize the way my dad's doing it is not the way it should be. And not out of our, and that may happen out of our own selfishness, right? It may happen out of our own self-centeredness, but it may have some truth to it. Whether it does come from our own selfishness or self-centeredness to begin with, it may still be true that that dad is not the best dad. How do we even know? It's comparison, right? It's comparison to all the other things around me, and yet, why do I end up deciding what's better or not? There's a concept and a desire for better, even if I leave that definition entirely up to me, or at least so I think. I'm still saying there is a better definition. There ought to be a better definition. And my answer, not just my answer, right? But I believe our faith would respond with, there is a better answer. There is a better answer for a dad than what you had. And I don't care how good your dads were. There's a better answer for a dad than what you had. There's a better answer for a dad than what you have ever experienced. But everything good that you may have experienced, or everything that negative that you've compared against, you're like, it shouldn't be that. And all the other good experiences in between, all of that, all the good stuff, they all shine a little bit. They reflect in some way, shape, or form the best possible dad. And it's that one. The Father Almighty. So that's like I definitely don't. I would never want that to come across as flippant to anyone. That's what hurts is like, and I get it. Like, yeah, I've come to know, in my own the self-centered adolescence, and still, right? I can see all the downsides of my own dad, right? I get it. I've experienced that. I've experienced how that has shaped me, right? And I've experienced how I've longed for my own identity, my security, my purpose, to try to get that from my parents because they're that important, right? In all the ways that that's failed me, or, like my parents have failed, whatever the case is, right? I can relate to those things. I haven't, not saying I've been as terrible of an experience as some others, right? But I can relate to things. I get it. That points to the fact that there ought to be a Father, and we have the good news to say there it is. There ought to be the best parent possible. And okay, fine. You don't like the name, you don't like the, if you want to even get into gender or whatever, right? In terms of anyway, feminism or whatever else it may be. Father, mother, whatever, right? I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but what I'm saying is the best possible parents. You had them. You had parents, right? That all comes from the idea that we have a parent. We have the parent. And he sets us up that way. That's part of our original role, which is another thing that we would point out, all right? So there, in the whole purpose and meaning thing, this goes to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. He built us to do this. He built us to care for creation. To care for it in the same way that he cares for it. Not with the same power, but to the same degree. As much as I've loved you, made you perfect, and made this place perfect and everything, this is your role. Go be, literally, my hands and feet in this world. Go be my stewards. You operate on my behalf. You are to be my physical presence. All right? So go procreate. Go create stuff. Right? We can't create like he does. Right? We can argue about this back and forth if you want. If you want to get into science and those kinds of things. But for a long time, since the beginning, followers of this triune God have said, yep, this God is capable, according to what he has told us, of creating out of nothing. Creating at his own word. His word has the power to do it. Right? You guys don't do that. You guys don't have that power. But he has given you the ability to use what he's given you to do that. And for what purpose? To make sure you have a nice, cozy life? No. That's not what he says. He doesn't say, God bless you. God bless you. I bless you, right? He does not say, go, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and pursue life, liberty, and your happiness. That's not what he says. But he does say, go create, and go provide, go protect, go care for. Because I've already done it. I've already shown it. And we don't know what this is like. But we would have been made perfectly to know what our identity and our security and purpose is and how we get that from God. And we would have known that perfectly. And we would have known that's exactly what we do for the rest of creation. In our own unique ways. Okay? So how does he do? He tells us that part of an essential purpose is to procreate. That is why Christians have difficulty with some of the more contemporary issues of our time. Okay, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to genders, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to feminism, when it comes to family values, right, or the family centrism, right, or whether, is the government in charge of my kids or am I in charge of my kids, all of those kinds of things, all of those kinds of issues that we are wrestling with in a more modern day and age. Not that they never had these issues before, but as we are wrestling with them today, all of this and why Christians have a particular point of view in the first place is because our faith says that being parents and having that unit of community that's created by being parents is essential to who we are. Unfortunately, too many other people hear us say, "This is what's right, and you ought to be doing it." Well, whether that's true or not isn't necessarily helpful. Because when we say, "This is what's right," that's because we already have an answer for our purpose in this life. We've found it in something else that they don't have. So of course they're not going to hear it the same way. Of course they're not going to receive it the right way. If they've looked for their purpose, let alone their security and identity, in something else other than this triune God, then they are going to have an issue. There's going to be dissonance. What do you mean? I don't agree. That's not right. My purpose is to be me. Right, this is part of the individualism that we talked about last week. Right, the very particular kind of American humanism that we have now for the last handful of decades, maybe a century. Right, this rugged American individualism is an individualism that now says, I can find my identity, my security, my purpose in myself. Thank you. And I'm going to go pursue whatever that means for me. So the very act of you telling me that isn't right I don't expect you to know what's right, because I'll define it for myself. Okay, and you see the difference? Do you see the difference that our faith makes? Okay? So those are several of the ways, just thus far in the first article, that our faith makes a difference. Okay? Any questions, comments at this point? Yes, Al?
In general, we're not a completed created being. We're
Al, I think you've presented a wonderful example. Another way to talk about this. What difference does our faith make when we know that we do have answers to these questions? What do we do with that? In other words, and so as Al was talking about, I mean, let me see if I'm understanding you, Al. What Al is talking about is, yes, as creatures, we are very much in tune with the past, the present, and the future, because that's part of our limitation in being finite, is we only occupy a particular space in a particular point of time, which, you get into the relativism of time and all that, but it's not happening anymore. That's the past. And it hasn't happened yet is the future, right? And we only know what this is, but we know that we can have an impact on the future. And so should we? Should we try? Because if we as humans have been created, as Al pointed out, that sounds done. And so therefore, is this the way it is? And things ought to stay that way then? No. We all have a tug. The whole reason why we would even recognize that something is wrong is because things didn't stay perfectly right. Things didn't stay perfectly right. Things did go wrong. And our continued existence in the wrong breeds a seed of hope. I hope it doesn't stay this way. And guess what? From the beginning of time, or from the beginning of creation and things going wrong, God speaks to that. And says, it's not going to stay this way. The wonderful beauty of God's unconditional love and acceptance of us is that he will never stop saying, I love you completely. And he will never stop saying, I love you too much to leave you where you are.
That's the image of the Father, God the Father, I would want others to see. Now, a lot of people come from a family where, for whatever reason, their parents or their father didn't accept them the way they were, and they have that in
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing, kind of like a purpose in life, is for everyone you come in contact with to say, you are wonderfully, perfectly, fearfully made, exactly the way you are, and you are unconditionally loved. Even with all our sinfulness and all the things we do wrong, the image to me of God the Father is you are loved, and you feel that unconditional love.
So here's, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Like I would love for everyone to feel that way. To split hairs, if you will, is in those word choices that we make, that we may not recognize all the things that we might be saying, right? Does God absolutely loves me completely. That means how he has made me and how he has a future in mind for me that he wants me to have. And that is a future that is without everything that's wrong and broken in this world. And that may even include parts of me. That's the difference there. And I understand that the pain that we may have from our parents reflecting or being poor reflections or whatever, the pain that we may carry with us is that we heard a whole lot more, we don't want you to be the way you are, than I love you no matter what. But real love says, not necessarily both, because what we hear has to do with the failings of our own parents and how we hear them as broken humans as well. Real love says, love you completely. There is nothing you have to do to earn my acceptance or my care or have a place in my world, in my kingdom. And I love you so much, too much, to leave you where you are because of the brokenness in this world. Not just leave you where you are, like in a physical location, right? But in all the possible brokenness. And we deal with this as parents all the time. I definitely am already dealing with this. Right? I am living it a bit more in the present than many of you here. But I know it never goes away. You're always a parent, and you're always going to see this in your kids' lives and grandkids, etc. Is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, am I going to stop disciplining? Right? We can get into the definition of what discipline is and how we all felt it, how we all feel about the word, etc., right? That goes into our own past and perspectives and everything. But I believe in a God who says, I love you so much, I'm not going to leave you in this place. I'm not going to leave you in this brokenness. Right? And so his correction, if you will, comes out of his love and his grace. Not out of his shame. Shame on you for doing this. Not out of, why can't you just do it right? Not out of his frustration with us, though that could be as infinite, right? As all of the things that we do to mess up. Right? So how hard is it as a parent or a grandparent or whatever to communicate that, like, yes, I do think you may be doing something wrong. Yes, I do think that there may be a part of you that is broken. Does that have anything to do with how much I accept you? Or how much I'm willing to care for you? Or whether you have a place in this family? Sometimes we struggle with that. And sometimes we don't end up communicating what we wanted to in the first place, right? But that is our struggle, to attempt to reflect him as the parent when we are broken and we've received brokenness. And we're trying to reflect that through our brokenness, through the brokenness that we've received, to a bunch of brokenness. Like, that's a tall order. Blame it on Eve. You can blame it on Eve, you can blame it on Adam, you can blame it on everything, right? But the blame doesn't shift the responsibility. Right? It's uncomfortable. But that's why there's good news. Right? Our faith says we have a God who will not leave us where we are. And so all the brokenness in this life and all of the adversity that comes with it, that is unfortunately essential to our existence. Did God want it to be there? No. But will he use that? Yes. Will he use that for our good? Yes. And we get into like, man, are we interpreting that passage right or not? But at the very least, he will use the brokenness, the adversity, the challenge, whatever, he will use that to say, yeah, that isn't right, is it? There is something better, isn't there? Right? And, sorry, it just pops in my head. This is like a nice moment. Now I'm just going to blow it off. Now like Willy Wonka, say, come with me, won't you see? You know, right? That's the invitation that he gives us, right? Come see how much better things can be. And I've made this promise that, like, even if you struggle, even if you can't possibly grasp it right now, it's there and it's coming. Trust me.
You always drop your voice and now I'm going to
Do it. Do it. I paused long enough. Jump in, please.
For as many people
Absolutely. That's the good news, is that we can answer that. We get to share that with people, right? Part of the challenge is like having our own awareness, let alone do they have their awareness to recognize what are the questions being asked. And how does God, how does my faith share a good news answer to that? But yeah, this is one of those ways. We absolutely have a good news answer to that. Yes, Sylvia.
It seems like getting to know people, first of all, and maybe their background, maybe not, but just communicating with them the love of God in our response to them. Getting to know them, I guess is what I'm saying, because we can't just assume that everybody is like us.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, right, getting to know people, in our day and age is quite a task now, isn't it? And part of that is what we perceive we lack in common. I can think of an instances now where, like, where conversation might get struck up are instances in which we happen to share a situation in common, right? Some of the examples that are popping into my mind, like we're all waiting to board this plane, right? And the conversations that might come up, right? It's very easy to not. It's very easy to be like, I got my screen, I got my, I'm not saying that like we all need to like put down, it'd be great if we all put down our screens and tried to talk to each other, but like I'm not trying to guilt anyone. But that is an instance where that might happen, right? And where we might feel comfortable for whatever reason in sharing, like, okay, the last time we went, last time I was on a plane, flying with Carrie to Reno for PLI, and early morning flight or whatever, and we got our seats, and these two ladies were traveling together, and as we're getting situated, some commotion happens behind us, right? But because we happen to be sharing the same, but now all of a sudden, like, we shared that experience together, right? And so one of those ladies felt like, oh, well, like, comment can be made out loud to all four of us, right? Because of this something, we all experienced that. Okay, right? So, conversation, because there was something in the moment that we had in common. And the fear now is, look at all of those people who are so different from you, which is totally, from my perspective, like, as a millennial and growing up in the 90s, like, the messaging constantly was like rainbow, like, everybody, look at everything we all have in common, right? So now, as I'm like becoming an adult, and then with everything else that it's gone on and how things have gone down, I'm like, what? Like, where did it's in a sad amusing irony of the, like, hold on a second, like, aren't you the same people that told me, like, everything's getting better? Look at how we have everything in common, and so we should all be tolerating each other and all those kinds of things, right? And now it's like, because our differences aren't that big, right? And now we live much more of the messaging is about our differences. Even if people wouldn't disagree with the positive thing I just said, right? That doesn't make money. It doesn't. Yeah, man, I didn't mean to be on a political soapbox, but or social soapbox. But anyway, the point for Sylvia is to say, I think what, for me, the hope and the good news that I know that I have in what my faith says is we all have. The answers that I have apply to everybody. In terms of the answers that I have, the answers that have been given to me, right? Like, not like, oh, I have the answers for everybody. But like, the answers that God has given me, that this God that I know and the faith that I have, like, the answers to my identity, my security, and my purpose, those things apply to everybody. And so if I'm willing to, be open to that, to be receiving the other person, and open to, how God show me Show me what is it that that person needs to hear from you. Not needs to hear, like, man, like, needs to hear from you, right? Because that's not how God actually, like, wants to operate with us. Most of his, like, need to hear from you is because we, his own people, are such idiots. We screw things up so bad, repeatedly, over and over and over again, and we need 2x4s across, you know? So that's most of the instances in the Bible of him saying, you need to hear this, is to his own people. But to get to know someone is, what is the potential to see what we have in common? Yeah, yeah, and I'm gonna, and I would say even, okay, the first answer I wanted to reply with is that most of the things that we may disagree on, and the agreeing to disagree, are easy to say, we agree to disagree on that because they're not these essential answers. When we might disagree on where our answers are coming from, that's the opportunity to, do I have good news or not? Like, if I'm finding a different answer than someone who, like, who, you know, using the example of, like, individualism, right? Well, I'm coming up with this other answer that sounds really bizarre to you for how I'm going to go about life, because I found it for myself, and this is what it means to me, right? And you can check off the box and say, that's individualism, right? You're finding your purpose in yourself, not God, right? That's what, you know, me and my judgmental self might say, like, way in the back of my head. But I don't want anyone to receive that. That's not what God wants them to receive. Right? So the opportunity is to say, man, how can I, where's the opportunity, whether it's in that moment in my response, or man, I hope I get another chance to, or, you know, is to say, man, let me tell you about how I answer that question. Right? And that's in the, like, okay, we can agree to disagree, but I do hope you know, like, how great I think this answer is, not because it's better than yours, but because of what that means for me. And what I think that could mean for everybody. Not because everybody has to believe what I believe, you know, no. But, like, this is a gift that I have that's been given to me. Like, I know where I fit into this world, let's say, because he's told me, right? Or I know that it's there. I know that he has that for me. And man, do I struggle to, like, see it or grasp it or whatever. But I feel at such, I have my peace in, like, knowing it's there, and even if I don't ever completely grasp it and get to own it and make a name for myself with how awesome I am in this world, that, like, there will be a day when, like, I am that awesome self, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. Right? That's, again, like, are you able to deliver that in a conversation in the moment when, you know, you happen to talk to somebody in the line at the grocery store? Like, no. No, you don't. Like, it's perfectly okay to say, like, oh, thank you for sharing that. Like, oh, you know, like, that, yeah. That's normal. But that's where, I don't know if that did that make sense? Okay. Sylvia's nodding like, yeah. We can move on, Pastor. Yeah. Yeah.
People that I encounter, they pursue in life, they don't have a lot of faith, they have other gods, right? They're
Yeah.
pursuing money, they're pursuing status,
Right.
they're pursuing fame.
Right.
So you see people on this path who they'll do whatever, whatever to follow that God.
Mhm.
Just kind of keep on your profession. You know that there's no satisfaction at the end of that path, that you'll never have enough money, you'll never have enough status, you'll
Mhm.
never have enough fame, and God is going to say, who's better? So, be happy with the path God puts you on, and have a God in your life that
Mhm.
you know who you are, yes.
Right, and like we may see this play out in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of what Diane's talking about is like we see people like where we can see like whether they have cloned it, whether they would proclaim it for themselves or not. You can see like, man, they have chosen this particular God, right? Whether it's another world religion or whether it's something in their lives that they are pursuing and that's defining them right now. And like, man, you could be headed down an interesting path if that's the way you're going to continue to pursue. And that's like, at that moment, it's what can we do with that? And that's part of our responsibility as Christians, is recognizing like it may not be my place to speak into things, because the ability to speak into things requires a relationship, right? And that's like in a grocery store, the relationship is quite limited. Right? As a family member, the relationship is not limited, but boy, that can, who knows what the past has been, who knows what, like that could be all over the place, right? And it's when I recognize that's not the best choice. What do I do with it? Yes, that is an important place for prayer. Yeah, you can pray for that person and you can pray for change in that person's life, sure. But a prayer to say like, "Ooh, God, help me." Help me to like, depending on like if this is some sort of closeness to me, right? If I'm going to be seeing this on a regular, help me to be in this role, right? Help me in this relationship. Yeah, surely.
We have a daughter that she was very close to her brother. And when he died, she just kind of went up. How can God who loves me
Mm.
take him and leave 3 babies,
Mm-hmm.
twins, 6 months old, and a baby that just turned 3, and she just had a baby a week before, and he never got to see her. It's been 30 years, and she still hasn't come. And it hurts, but we try. She knows we have faith. Sometimes she comes to church with us, and all I do is pray all the time that
Mm-hmm.
before I die, that my example will at least be something to her, that God will take away the pain and give her something. But it's been 30 years, and I've been trying. I don't know how
Yeah.
to do it anymore,
Yeah.
And I'm close to her, and we can talk, but there's only a certain point you can get, and then she closes down, too.
Right. 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 Yeah, those are. That's.
She's just
I-
had so much pain, she can't
Yeah, well, that's a great example, and we all can think of them in our lives or others or whatever of, that bring up those questions of suffering, right? Like, why would these things happen? And we as Christians get ourselves in trouble when we attempt to answer that question further than what he has given us to answer it with. And the part of, sorry, I thought of something that's relevant to what I was saying, but not relevant to what you were saying. So I'm like, no, don't say that. It's quite true and it's good, but I'll think about that later. The suffering question, like why does it exist, can be a multifaceted answer, and that's where we get ourselves into trouble. Ultimately, we have a faith that knows what will become of suffering. And we know that we have a God who will not let it stay that way. And that's very difficult when in our limited human existence, that's all we seem to have experienced. When we are able to grasp, willing to grasp that there is more than this existence, and that there is hope in that reality, that there is more than this existence, that's actually hopeful and good news. It really is the only hope that we have for us to address anything, whether it's as devastating as what you were talking about, or I can't find my car keys right now, right? There is something on the other side of suffering. Yeah, and that is, well, yeah, that ultimately is the best true answer. That's something that God is going to do, and not you. And I'm sure you have been, but to continue to pray in that way, God, please continue to show me what could be said. What hope can I continue to give her, to show her that there is, right, this God didn't do this to you, is one of the rocks in the path that we always need to wrestle with. And right, and we can get into, my mind is just going into like all the theological, God didn't do this because, anyway. But that's not our lived, our reality is much more down to earth than that. Yeah, that's right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the transformation and the getting through whatever is wrong may take a super long time. Right? It may take whatever time it takes God to finally say, I'm coming back. Right? And so this also, guys, goes into the idea of progress. We long for the progress because God's promised us that it will be there. There will be progress. Progressivism, however, tells us that we find our identity and our security and our purpose in things always getting better. Right? Part of the fault there is like, well, what's better and what's worse? And who gets to define that? Right, Sally? I do, right? No. Sally gets to define what's better, right? No. No, Sally has a different question. But that's exactly like, yes, we ought not stay where we are. Yes, God has gifted us the abilities to make things better. Right? We always got to ask, is it his definition of better? Does our idea better fit with his idea better? Right? And we can attempt to get that way. And in doing so points to the fact that there will be a better with a capital B. Right? There will be the best at some point in time. We are not going to create the best here. Right? That's the humility that comes in there, right? Whereas as Christians, we ought to be struggling with progressivism. I'm not saying, like, if you're a progressive, good for you, right? That there's a hope there that things ought to be moving towards something better. Yes. Amen. There's also a humility and a reality, right? That is lived out, you know, and Shirley, was it your sister? Your daughter, right? Yeah, your daughter's lived experience says sometimes things can't get better in this life. So what does progressivism say to that? Sadly, if you want to get super philosophical and academic, it can get kind of sick and ugly. Progressivism might say, well, then that life ought not to be lived. Sometimes. It can't, I mean, depending on where people may find the answers. Right? If they've seen the answers like, well, things ought to be getting better and they're not, right? That can be very hopeless. Right? And the despair can come in that way. That's I mean,
They're tired of being in that space of hopelessness. And nobody can do that for them. They have to acknowledge the struggle and try to move on. It sounds very
no, I know, I'm totally with you. I absolutely agree with you. And it's like, right, again, psychology is limited where it would say, yep, that person's got to deal with it, right? And it's like, well, it's going to take more than that too. And I know that you're saying, and you're like, God's going to work. God's going to work on them. And God's going to work on them by recognizing that there is a place to move from. What is the place that you're actually in? Right? Recognizing this is the reality, and I don't want to stay there. God doesn't want me to stay there, and that's the only way I'm gonna see like awesome movement is by Him, you know, getting me out. Like if I really am in a place that deep, like it may take something that powerful as God himself moving me out of that. And if I'm not going to see that, I'm going to stay right where I am. Thank you. That's the struggle that he gives us, right? And that goes back to, I mean, again, philosophically, that goes back to the whole question of like, why does it exist in the first place? The fact that he gave us a choice. The fact that he gave us a choice, because that's what a relationship looks like. Because if I program, we talked about this last week, if I program the robot to do dishes, if all it ever does is do the dishes, the robot doesn't love me. The robot doesn't have the relationship with me. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do. I give the robot a choice. I give a robot a choice. What's the basis that it continues to do the dishes for me? All right. Now we can get into questions of AI, right? Ooh, all right. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But oh man, we were past time. Told you. I will have no problem filling the time. But yeah, yeah. It's difficult when the people themselves are in a place, or when you may be in a place where can I see that this even can change, and what may need to change, do I want it to, and all those kinds of things, right? This is all different anyway. And I'm speaking in a vacuum, right? Not knowing exactly what's on everyone's hearts, but yes, we have a God who says, you don't have to get out of where you're at in order for me to love you. You don't have to get out of where you're at to be cared for. That even in your worst possible place, you're not alone. Even in your worst possible place, I care about you. Even in your worst possible place, you still belong. You belong in my family. Right? The willingness to see that. I mean, that's the work of the Holy Spirit too, right? But anyway, it's complicated. But we have a God who says that. You're not a loser, and you're not a lost cause, no matter where you are. I know we're way over time. If you want to go, need to go, you can go. But I do want to, Sally, I held off your hand for too long.
Things that you said, and the cross on that is, it's not in our time, it's in God's time.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And we can pray, we can have faith, we can have hope, always, but
Mm-hmm.
until He's ready
Yeah.
to make things happen, things will happen.
Right. And we don't get that. We don't get why God's timing is not our timing. Yeah. Are we willing to trust? Are we willing to trust that His timing is best? Or at least better than the timing that's disappointing me? Is His timing best? And am I willing to trust that? That's difficult, right? And that's another really hard, uncomfortable, and yet beautiful truth is that if He is the best if he is perfect, if he is holy, if he is loving, if all of those things, and he is immovable from that, then the distance that I have from him has something to do with me. Right? And maybe the circumstances in my life, it may be like there's plenty of brokenness to go around, right? It's not all my fault. But, right, in that particular question of it's not his timing, and am I willing to trust? If I'm struggling to trust, if my faith says that he is the Father Almighty, then my ability to trust is that struggle is with me, which some people will have an issue with, right? Like, the problem's with me. Well, I don't need a faith that says the problem's with me. Well, but if nobody recognizes that any of the brokenness in this world could have been contributed by them, then we are in one messed up place, right? And then where does that, what are we going to do with that? Right? So some of it has to do with me. That's the only way to make sense of this life, ultimately. Again, without diving into another hour or two of philosophy, but yeah. Okay. Thank you all. Look, see, I don't know if we even got all the way through the first article, but there's plenty to talk about. And this is why we're here, is not to get all of the answers or to complete the assignment, but to have the discussions. They say, yeah, this is the difference that our faith makes. And then along the way, hopefully you appreciate, the Apostles' Creed maybe a little more too. And this is what this reminds me when I recite it every week. So, welcome back to catechism class. You're welcome. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.